What the hell is this? Grant's voice dropped to a cold whisper as he saw her. Nia, hands tied behind her back, baby Ezra asleep on her chest, completely unaware of the danger around him. Claudette claimed Nia had done it to herself, but Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. One lie, one misstep, and his whole family could be at risk. And then his eyes flicked toward the kitchen counter, where a hidden bottle hinted at a truth nobody was ready to face. The truth that could destroy everything he thought he knew. Just hours before, the mansion was quiet, the rain falling softly outside. Nia moved through her day unaware that one evening would change everything forever. The mansion doors slammed open like a judge's gavel. Grant Ashford wasn't supposed to be home, not tonight, not for 3 more days. But there he stood in the marble entryway, rain dripping from his $1,000 coat, briefcase still in hand, staring at something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his own home. Thunder cracked outside. The lights flickered once. And in that half-second of darkness, he saw it again, just to make sure his eyes weren't lying. His 6-month-old son, Ezra, was strapped to the black maid's chest in a baby sling, and her hands were tied behind her back. Not loosely, not like some accident. Tied, with actual rope, tight enough that her wrists had gone red. The baby slept peacefully against her, completely unaware, while Nia knelt on the nursery floor like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. Grant's heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his skull. His phone almost slipped from his hand. What the hell is this? His voice came out quiet. Too quiet. That's how you knew Grant Ashford was truly angry, when the volume dropped instead of rising. Nia's eyes shot up to meet his. They were wide, terrified, desperate, pleading. Her lips parted like she was trying to speak, but only a choked sound came out. She twisted her shoulders, trying to show him the rope, trying to show him she was trapped, but to Grant in that moment it looked like guilt. Before anyone could breathe, heels clicked rapidly down the hallway. Claudette, Grant's girlfriend of 2 years, the woman who'd moved in after his wife's death, appeared in the doorway. Her face was flushed, her silk robe barely tied, her expression a perfect mixture of shock and relief. "Oh my God, Grant, thank God you're here." Claudette rushed forward, practically throwing herself between him and the scene. "I came upstairs to check on Ezra and I found this." She gestured wildly at Nia. She had him strapped to her chest and she was doing something to herself, tying her own hands. I think she was trying to stage something, Grant, like she wanted it to look like someone attacked her. Grant's jaw clenched. His eyes moved from Claudette to Nia, then down to his sleeping son. "That's insane," he muttered. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Why else would someone tie their own hands with a baby strapped to them? "I know how it sounds," Claudette continued, her voice shaking. "But I've been worried about her for weeks. She's been acting strange, paranoid. I didn't want to say anything because I know your mother trusted her, but Grant, I think she's having some kind of breakdown." Nia finally found her voice. "That's not... She's lying. Please, Mr. Ashford, just look at the knots." "Untie her," Grant ordered, cutting her off. Claudette hesitated. "Grant, I don't think we should... Untie her, now." Claudette's jaw tightened, but she moved behind Nia and began working the rope loose. It took longer than it should have. The knots were complicated, tight, deliberately cruel. When Nia's hands finally came free, she gasped in pain, her fingers cramping as blood rushed back into them. She immediately reached for the baby sling, cradling Ezra's head even though he was still sound asleep. "Give him to me," Grant said, his voice ice cold. Nia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Her hands trembled as she carefully unclipped the sling and transferred the baby into his father's arms. Ezra stirred slightly, then settled back into sleep against Grant's chest. Grant stared down at his son, perfect, peaceful, unharmed, then back up at Nia. "Explain. Right now." Nia rubbed her raw wrists, her breath coming in short gasps. "She did this. She tied me up. She told me if I screamed, if I fought back, she'd hurt him. She said, 'That's a lie.'" Claudette's voice pitched higher, almost hysterical. Grant, she's trying to manipulate you. This is exactly what unstable people do. They create elaborate stories to cover their tracks. I'm not lying, Nia's voice cracked. Please, you have to believe me. Why would she tie you up? Grant demanded. What possible reason would Claudette have to do that? Nia's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to Claudette, who stared back with the expression of wounded innocence. I don't know, Nia whispered. But I didn't do this to myself. I couldn't have. The knots, they were behind my back. People can tie their own hands, Claudette said softly, almost gently. I've seen it in crime documentaries. It's a manipulation tactic. Grant felt the room tilt. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Nia's good people, Grant. Promise me you'll take care of her when I'm gone. But his mother was gone. And nothing about this scene made any sense. He looked at Nia, really looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, the desperate way she kept glancing at Ezra like she was terrified she'd never see him again. Then he looked at Claudette, calm now, composed, the concerned girlfriend who'd discovered something terrible. One of them was lying. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Nia, go to your room. Don't leave this house. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Grant, Claudette started. You too, he said, not looking at her. Both of you, separate rooms. I need to think. Nia stood on shaking legs and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back at Grant one more time. Your mother knew, she whispered. She tried to warn you. Then she was gone. Claudette moved closer to Grant, reaching out to touch his arm. Baby, you can't seriously be considering... He stepped back. I said go. Her face hardened for just a fraction of a second, so quick he almost missed it. Then the softness returned. Of course, she murmured. Whatever you need. She left, and Grant was alone with his sleeping son. In the silence, he noticed something on the floor where Nia had been kneeling. A small pool of blood, from her wrists. If you believe everyone deserves to be heard before they're condemned, hit subscribe right now. Only the heartless skip truth. Grant didn't sleep. He spent the next 2 hours pacing his study, Ezra asleep in a portable crib beside his desk, while his mind replayed the scene over and over. The rope marks on Nia's wrists had been deep, real, the kind that came from struggling against restraints, not from casually tying yourself up for some twisted scheme. But Claudette's explanation made logical sense. Nia had been acting different lately, quieter, more withdrawn. He'd chalked it up to grief over his mother's death, but what if it was something darker? What if his mother had been wrong about her? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Claudette entered, now dressed in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked smaller somehow, vulnerable. I couldn't sleep, she said quietly. Can we talk? Grant gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat, folding her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. I need you to walk me through exactly what you saw, Grant said. Every detail. Claudette took a breath. I woke up around 11. You know how I am. I always check on Ezra before I go to bed when you're away. It makes me feel better. Her voice wavered slightly. When I got to the nursery, the door was cracked open. I heard sounds like someone struggling, breathing hard. And I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw her, Nia, on her knees with Ezra strapped to her chest and her hands behind her back. At first, I thought someone had broken in. I almost screamed, but then I realized we were alone, just the three of us in the house. What was she doing? Rocking, back and forth like she was in some kind of trance, and she was whispering something I couldn't understand. Claudette's eyes welled up. Grant, it scared me. I didn't know if she was praying or having a breakdown or planning something awful. Grant leaned back in his chair. She said you tied her up. I know. Claudette's voice broke. I know that's what she's saying, and it kills me that you even have to consider it. But think about it. Really think. Why would I hurt her? What would I possibly gain? It was a fair question, one Grant had been wrestling with all night. She said my mother tried to warn me about something. Claudette's expression shifted. Something flickered across her face too quickly to name. Your mother was sick for a long time, Grant. Toward the end, she said a lot of things that didn't make sense. She seemed pretty lucid when she told me to take care of Nia. Of course she did. She loved Nia. They were close. Claudette stood, moving around the desk to stand beside him. But that doesn't mean Nia's stable. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who fool us best. Grant's phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. Checked footage. Nursery camera was disconnected at 10:47 p.m. Kitchen camera shows Nia going upstairs at 10:52. No other movement until you arrived. He showed Claudette the message. Her eyes widened. She disconnected the camera? Someone did. Grant. Claudette's hand found his shoulder. Please. I know you want to believe in her because of your mother, but you have to protect Ezra. That's what matters now. He looked down at his sleeping son. So small, so helpless. Then he stood abruptly. I'm going to talk to her again. Claudette's grip tightened. Why? So she can feed you more lies? Because something doesn't add up. He moved toward the door. And I need to know what. He found Nia in her small room at the back of the house, sitting in the same position as before, on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing. Her wrists were bandaged now. She'd wrapped them herself. Grant leaned against the doorframe. Why won't you fight harder? Why won't you defend yourself? Nia looked up at him with exhausted eyes. Would it matter? Answer the question. She stood slowly, her movements careful like someone who'd been beaten down too many times to waste energy on hope. I've been a black woman in America for 28 years, Mr. Ashford. I know how this works. When it's my word against hers. She gestured vaguely toward the rest of the house. I've already lost. That's not true. Isn't it? Nia's voice stayed level, but her eyes blazed. You walked into that room and you saw me with your son. You saw the rope, and you believed her before I even opened my mouth. Grant felt the accusation like a slap. The security camera was disconnected, he said instead. Did you do that? No. Then who did? Nia's jaw tightened. She looked toward the window, then back at him. Ask yourself who benefits from there being no footage. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you without making things worse for myself. She picked up her duffel bag from the bed. Your mother told me 3 days before she died that I needed to be careful. She said Claudette wasn't who I thought she was. Grant's chest tightened. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because you're in love with her. Nia's voice finally broke. And because dying women sometimes see threats that aren't there. I didn't want to disrespect her memory by spreading paranoia. But now you're telling me. Now I don't have a choice. She moved toward the door, and Grant didn't stop her. I didn't tie myself up. I didn't disconnect that camera, and I would never ever hurt that baby. But you're going to believe what you want to believe. She stopped beside him, so close he could see tears forming in her eyes. I just hope you figure out the truth before it's too late. Then she walked past him, down the hallway, and out the front door. This time, Grant didn't try to stop her. He stood alone in the empty room, his mind racing. One thought kept circling back, louder than all the others. What if my mother was right? Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Drop a comment, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you saw. Nia didn't make it far. She got as far as the front gate before the rain turned violent. No umbrella, no car, just her in a duffel bag and the kind of downpour that felt like punishment from above. She could have called someone. Should have. But who? Her aunt in Georgia hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, not since Naya chose to stay working for rich white folks instead of coming home. Her friends from college had moved on, started families, stopped returning texts. So she did the only thing left. She turned around and walked to the small guest house at the edge of the Ashford property, the one Grant's mother used to use for her garden parties. It had been locked since the funeral, but Nia still had the key. She'd been the one to clean it out after the service. Inside, it smelled like dust and old memories. She dropped her bag on the floor and sank onto the worn couch, letting the silence swallow her whole. Her wrists throbbed, her chest ached from crying without making a sound. And somewhere across the property in that massive mansion with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, baby Ezra was sleeping without her. She'd been taking care of him since the day he was born, rocking him through colic, singing him to sleep when his mother died and Grant couldn't bear to hold him without breaking down. She knew which lullaby made him stop fussing. She knew he hated the blue pacifier but loved the green one. She knew everything, and now she was nothing. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Naya sat in the darkness, replaying the scene in her head, trying to understand how Claudette had moved so fast. One moment, Naya had been changing Ezra's diaper. The next, Claudette was behind her with rope and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Make a sound and I'll say you hurt him. Who do you think he'll believe?" Naya should have fought harder, should have screamed. But Claudette had been holding a letter opener too close to Ezra's crib, and Nia couldn't risk it. So she'd let herself be tied, let herself be framed, let herself become the villain in a story she didn't write. Now, in the quiet of the guest house, she did the only thing that brought her peace. She hummed, the same lullaby she sang to Ezra every night. Soft and low, just loud enough to fill the emptiness. Her voice cracked on the high notes, but she kept going, kept humming like maybe somehow across the dark lawn and through the storm, that baby boy could still hear her, could still know she loved him. She didn't know Grant was watching. He'd left the main house 20 minutes ago, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about the blood on the nursery floor. He'd walked the property in the rain like a ghost, and when he saw the dim light in the guest house window, something pulled him closer. Now he stood outside, rain soaking through his shirt, staring through the gap in the curtains at Nia sitting alone in the dark, humming, her wrists still bandaged, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to protect something that had already been taken. And for the first time since he'd walked through those mansion doors, Grant felt something crack inside his chest. Not certainty, not clarity, just doubt. Raw and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. He turned and walked back toward the house, his mind louder than the thunder overhead. Behind him, Nia kept humming. Comment, I stand for Nia. If you believe kindness in chains is still kindness. By morning, the entire staff knew. Claudette made sure of it. She sat in the kitchen at 7 a.m., wrapped in a cashmere robe, sipping coffee like she was the lady of the house. The cook, a woman named Beatrice who'd worked for the Ashfords for 15 years, was preparing breakfast when Claudette dropped the bomb. "I still can't believe it," Claudette said, shaking her head slowly. Poor Grant. To trust someone so completely and then this. Beatrice glanced up from the eggs she was scrambling. "What happened?" Claudette leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a terrible secret. "Nia. Last night, Grant came home and found her." She paused for effect. With the baby tied to her, her hands bound behind her back, like she was staging some kind of... I don't even know what to call it. Beatrice's spatula froze midair. Tied? Why would she... Exactly. Claudette's eyes widened with practiced concern. Grant thinks she might be mentally unstable. His mother's death hit her hard, But we didn't realize how hard. She's been acting paranoid for weeks, talking to herself, crying at strange hours. That doesn't sound like Nia, Beatrice said slowly. Claudette's smile tightened. I know. That's what makes it so sad. She was always so good with Ezra. But I guess you never really know someone, do you? The gardener overheard. Then the housekeeper. By 8 a.m., the whispers had spread through the staff like wildfire. Did you hear about Nia? She tied herself up with the baby. Grant almost called the police. I always thought something was off about her. Most of them believed it without question. Why wouldn't they? Claudette was Grant's girlfriend. She had no reason to lie. But Beatrice couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. She'd known Nia for 8 months. Watched her care for that baby like he was her own. Seen the way she'd mourned Mrs. Ashford. Quietly, privately, with the kind of grief that didn't need an audience. This wasn't a woman who'd do something cruel or reckless. So at noon, when Claudette was upstairs, Beatrice took a risk. She pulled out her phone and checked the kitchen security log, the one that tracked when doors opened and closed, when lights turned on and off. Staff weren't supposed to access it, but Beatrice had the password. Mrs. Ashford had given it to her years ago in case of emergencies. She scrolled to the previous night. 10:47 p.m., nursery camera disconnected. 10:52 p.m., Nia enters main stairwell. 10:58 p.m., Claudette enters main stairwell. Beatrice frowned. If Claudette had discovered Nia at 11, like she claimed, why had she gone upstairs at 10:58? That was only 6 minutes after Nia. Not enough time for Nia to tie herself up, calm the baby, and be found in distress, but plenty of time for someone else to tie her. Beatrice's stomach twisted. She was still staring at her phone when Claudette's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. What are you looking at? Beatrice jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Claudette stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Nothing, Beatrice stammered. Just checking my schedule. Claudette moved closer, her gaze dropping to the phone screen before Beatrice could lock it. For a second, just a fraction of a second, Claudette's mask slipped. Her expression went cold. Calculating. Dangerous. Then the warmth returned. You know, Claudette said softly, I've been meaning to talk to Grant about staffing. We might need to make some changes. Cut costs. The estate is expensive to run. The threat was clear. Beatrice swallowed hard. Of course, whatever Mr. Ashford thinks is best. Claudette smiled. I'm glad we understand each other. She turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Beatrice stood frozen, her heart pounding. She should tell Grant. She should show him the logs. But if she did, if Claudette found out, she'd lose her job. Maybe worse. So she did what people always do when power protects the guilty. She stayed silent, and Nia remained condemned. Grant couldn't focus. He'd tried working, answering emails, reviewing contracts, pretending his world hadn't tilted sideways. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nia's face. The way she'd looked at him when she said, "Your mother knew." By mid-afternoon, he found himself in the one room he'd been avoiding for 6 months, his late wife's study. It still smelled like her, lavender and old books. Her reading glasses sat on the desk exactly where she'd left them. Her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, still held dried coffee stains at the bottom. Grant hadn't touched anything. Couldn't. Walking into this room felt like stepping into a memory he wasn't ready to face. But today, something pulled him to the bookshelf. There, tucked between a poetry collection and a novel about grief, was a photo album he didn't recognize. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. He pulled it down and sat in his wife's chair, the one that still held the indent of her body. He opened it. The first photograph stopped his breath. It was taken 2 weeks before Elise died. She was in bed, pale and thin, her hair gone from the chemo. Ezra, barely a month old, was cradled in her arms, and standing beside the bed, smiling with tears in her eyes, was Nia. Grant remembered that day. He'd been in meetings downtown, trying to keep the company running while his wife slipped away. He'd missed this moment, but Nia had been there. He turned the page. More photos. Nia holding Ezra while Elise slept. Nia reading to Elise from a book of poems. Nia braiding what little hair Elise had left, both of them laughing at something Grant couldn't hear through the picture. On the last page there was a note in Elise's handwriting. Shaky, barely legible, but unmistakably hers. Grant, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Please don't let grief make you forget what matters. Nia is family now. She loves Ezra like I do. Trust her the way I trust you. Promise me. A. Grant's hands trembled. Elise had never been wrong about people. She'd known Claudette was interested in Grant before he did. She'd warned him to be careful, to not let loneliness cloud his judgment. But she'd never said a single negative word about Nia. In fact, she'd done the opposite. She'd asked Nia to be Ezra's godmother. Informal, unsanctioned, but real. Grant had been there for that conversation, remembered how Nia had cried and promised to protect that baby with her life. His chest tightened. He stood and walked to the window, the album still in his hands. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving everything wet and clean and quiet. Somewhere across the lawn in that guest house, Nia was probably awake, probably still humming that lullaby his wife used to sing. Grant pulled out his phone and opened the security logs. The full version, the one only he had access to. He scrolled to last night. 10:47 p.m. Nursery camera disconnected. His jaw tightened. Someone had manually disabled it. You couldn't do that remotely. You had to be in the room. He kept scrolling. 10:52 p.m. Nia enters main stairwell. 10:58 p.m. Claudette enters main stairwell. 11:14 p.m. Grant arrives home. Grant stared at the timestamps. Claudette had told him she'd found Nia right before 11. But she'd gone upstairs 6 minutes after Nia, not before, which meant she'd lied about the timing. His stomach dropped. He thought about Claudette's face last night, the way she'd rushed to explain before he could ask questions, the way she'd planted doubt about Nia's mental state, about theft, about kidnapping, all without a shred of proof. He thought about Nia's silence, her refusal to fight, the way she'd said, "I've already lost." And he thought about his wife's final words, "Trust her the way I trust you." Grant set the photo album down carefully, like it was made of glass. Then he walked out of the study and straight toward the guest house. It was time to hear the truth, even if it destroyed him. Grant didn't knock. He pushed open the door to the guest house and found Nia exactly where he'd left her in his mind, sitting on that worn couch, staring at nothing, her bandaged wrists resting in her lap like evidence of a crime no one cared to solve. She looked up when he entered. No surprise, no fear, just exhaustion. "Come to finish what you started?" she asked quietly. "I came to hear your side." Grant's voice was rough, strained. "The real story, not the version you think I want to hear." Nia laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You already decided what you believe?" "I'm here, aren't I?" "You were here last night, too." She stood slowly, her movements careful. "You looked me in the eye and chose her. Why should today be any different?" Grant felt anger flare in his chest, not at her, but at himself. Because she was right. He had chosen Claudette. He'd let bias and grief and exhaustion make the choice for him. "My wife trusted you," he said instead. "I found her journal, her photos. She called you family." Nia's expression cracked just slightly. "Elise was the only person in this house who ever saw me as more than help." "That's not true, isn't it?" Nia's voice rose for the first time. "You pay me to raise your son, but you don't ask me how I'm doing. You don't ask if I'm okay after watching the woman I cared about die in front of me. You just expect me to keep going, keep smiling, Keep being invisible until you need something. The words hit like stones. Grant opened his mouth to argue, then realized he couldn't. She was right. The camera was disconnected at 10:47, he said, changing tactics. Who did that? Not me. Then who? Naya's eyes burned. The same person who tied my hands. The same person who stood over me and whispered that if I said anything, she'd tell you I tried to hurt Ezra. The same person who's been slowly poisoning you against me for months. Claudette wouldn't what? Nia stepped closer. Lie? Manipulate. She's been doing it since the day she moved in. Elise saw it. Your mother saw it. But you're too in love, or too lonely, to see what's right in front of you. Grant's fists clenched. You don't get to talk about my relationship. Then you don't get to talk about my loyalty. Nia's voice cracked. I was there when your wife died. I held her hand. I promised her I'd protect Ezra. And last night, I kept that promise even when it meant letting myself be destroyed. What are you talking about? Naya's face twisted with something between rage and grief. She had a letter opener, Grant. While she was tying my hands, she kept it close to Ezra's crib. Close enough that if I screamed, if I fought, she could... Her voice broke. I couldn't risk it. So I let her do it. I let her tie me up and frame me because protecting your son was more important than protecting myself. The room went silent except for the sound of Nia crying, deep, wrenching sobs she'd been holding back for hours. Grant felt something inside him shatter. Why didn't you tell me this last night? Because you looked at me like I was already guilty. Nia wiped her eyes roughly. Because I'm a black woman accusing a white woman of assault, and we both know how that story ends. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm rolling in. Grant sank into the chair across from her, his head in his hands. I don't know what's real anymore. Yes, you do. Nia's voice was steady now. You just don't want to believe it. He looked up at her. If you're telling the truth, if she really did this, then I need proof, something concrete. The timestamps, Nia said. Check when she went upstairs. Check how long she was, there before you arrived. I already did. Grant's voice was barely a whisper. She lied about the timing. Nia closed her eyes, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. Then you know. The storm broke outside. Rain hammered against the windows. Lightning split the sky. But inside Grant's mind, a different storm was raging. Because if Nia was telling the truth, if Claudette had really done this, then everything Grant thought he knew about his life was a lie. And he'd have to decide what came next. Justice or comfort, truth or peace. He stood abruptly. Stay here. Don't leave. Where are you going? Grant's jaw tightened. To get answers. He walked out into the storm, rain soaking him instantly, and headed back toward the mansion. Behind him, Nia whispered a prayer he didn't hear. Please, God, let him see the truth before it's too late. Dawn came cold and unforgiving. Nia hadn't slept. Her body had given up trying hours ago, settling instead into that numb space between exhaustion and surrender. Her arms ached from the rope burn, her shoulders stiff from sitting in the same position all night. But she refused to cry anymore. She'd cried enough. Cried when Elise died. Cried when Grant looked at her like she was a stranger. Cried when she realized that kindness meant nothing when power decided you were guilty. Now, she just sat, waiting. For what? She didn't know. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her lift her head. Through the window, she saw Claudette crossing the lawn toward the main house, her hair perfect despite the early hour, a coffee mug in one hand. She looked refreshed, satisfied, like someone who'd slept the sleep of the righteous. Nia's jaw tightened. Back in the mansion, baby Ezra was waking up. Nia could almost hear him from here. That soft whimper that meant he was hungry. That little sound that used to bring her running every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. But she wasn't there, and Ezra didn't understand why. Inside the nursery, Claudette stood over the crib, watching the baby fuss. She'd never been good with children. Didn't particularly like them, if she was honest. But she smiled down at Ezra like she was auditioning for Mother of the Year. "Poor thing," she cooed. "Missing your crazy nanny, aren't you?" Ezra's whimpers grew louder. Claudette sighed and moved to the small kitchenette attached to the nursery, the one Nia used to prepare bottles and warm food. She pulled open the mini fridge, scanning the contents. 3 bottles of prepared formula, all labeled with times and dates in Nia's careful handwriting. Claudette grabbed the nearest one without looking and popped it in the bottle warmer. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention, when Beatrice appeared in the doorway. "Do you need help, Miss Claudette?" Claudette glanced up, irritated. "I can handle a bottle, Beatrice." "Of course." Beatrice hesitated. "It's just, Nia always checks the dates before. Nia isn't here anymore." Claudette's voice turned sharp. "And frankly, after what she did, I don't think we should be taking advice from her, do you?" Beatrice lowered her eyes. "No, miss." The bottle warmer beeped. Claudette pulled out the bottle, tested it quickly on her wrist, barely warm but good enough, and moved toward the crib. That's when she heard it. A voice. Quiet, almost a whisper, from outside. Nia stood at the nursery window, not close enough to enter but close enough to see. Her face pressed near the glass, her eyes locked on the bottle in Claudette's hand. "Don't feed him that bottle." Claudette froze. Then she smiled, slow and cruel. "Excuse me?" "That bottle." Nia's voice was hoarse but firm. "It's been sitting out too long. Check the date, please." Claudette glanced at the label. The bottle had been prepared yesterday morning, 24 hours ago. Formula wasn't supposed to sit that long, even refrigerated. It could make a baby sick. But Claudette didn't care. She held Nia's gaze through the glass and lifted the bottle higher. "You don't work here anymore, Nia. You don't get to tell me what to do." "Please," Nia's voice cracked. "He's just a baby. He didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did I." Claudette's smile widened. "But here we are." She turned away from the window and brought the bottle to Ezra's lips. The baby latched on immediately, sucking hungrily. Outside, Nia's knees buckled. She wanted to scream, wanted to break through that window and rip the bottle away, but she had no power here. No voice. No rights. So she did the only thing she could. She watched. And she prayed that someone, anyone, would see the truth before it was too late. Grant hadn't slept either. He'd spent the night pacing his bedroom, replaying conversations, dissecting timelines, trying to make sense of a puzzle where none of the pieces fit. By 5 a.m., he'd given up on rest and started reviewing the security footage frame by frame. That's when he noticed something strange. At 10:46 p.m., 1 minute before the nursery camera was disconnected, there was a brief flash of movement near the kitchenette. Someone reaching into the mini fridge, someone pulling something out. The angle was wrong, the resolution too grainy. He couldn't see who it was, but he could see what happened next. The figure moved toward the small stove, the one Nia used to warm bottles and baby food, and tucked something behind it. Then the camera cut to black. Grant stared at the frozen screen. Why would someone hide something behind the stove? By 7 a.m., he couldn't stand it anymore. He walked to the nursery, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't name. Claudette was already there, feeding Ezra on the rocking chair, looking every bit the devoted stepmother. She smiled when she saw him. "Morning, baby. You look terrible." "Didn't sleep." Grant's eyes scanned the room. "Where's the bottle you're using?" Claudette frowned. "What?" "The bottle. Where did you get it?" "From the fridge. Why?" "Which one?" Claudette's smile faltered. "I don't know, Grant. Does it matter? They're all the same." "Show me the label." "Grant, you're being paranoid. Show me the label. Claudette sighed and held up the bottle. The date read, prepared 6 a.m. day before. Grant's stomach dropped. That's over 24 hours old. So, it was refrigerated. Formula expires after 24 hours, Claudette. Even refrigerated, it can make him sick. For the first time, Claudette looked uncertain. I didn't know that. Nia would have known. Grant took the bottle from her hand and set it aside. Ezra fussed, still hungry, and Grant's chest tightened. Why didn't you check? Because I'm not a professional nanny. Claudette stood, her voice rising. I was trying to help. I'm sorry I'm not perfect like your precious Nia. Grant ignored the jab. He moved to the kitchenette, his mind racing. If someone had hidden something behind the stove last night, if it was connected to what happened with Nia. He crouched down and pulled the stove away from the wall. Behind it, wedged between the appliance and the baseboard, was another bottle. This one was half empty, uncapped. The formula inside had separated, turned slightly yellow. It smelled sour even from a distance. Grant picked it up carefully, his hands trembling. The label read, prepared 8 a.m. 2 days before. 48 hours old, spoiled, dangerous. His blood went cold. What is that? Claudette's voice was tight. Grant turned to face her, the bottle in his hand. You tell me. I don't know what that is. I've never seen it before. Really? Grant's voice was dangerously quiet. Because someone hid this here last night, right before the camera was disconnected, right before you found Nia tied up. Claudette's face went pale. You think That's insane, Grant. Why would I hide a spoiled bottle? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He pulled out his phone and opened the security footage. He showed her the timestamp, the figure near the fridge, the movement toward the stove. That's not me, Claudette said quickly. Too quickly. The angle's wrong. You can't even see who it is. You're right. Grant set the bottle down on the counter. I can't see who it is, but I can see the timeline, and I can see that you lied about when you went upstairs. Claudette's mouth opened, then closed. You said you found Nia around 11, but the logs show you went upstairs at 10:58, 6 minutes after Nia. That's not enough time for her to tie herself up and calm the baby. I must have gotten the time wrong, or you're lying. Grant's voice cracked. Were you planning to feed this to Ezra, make him sick and blame Nia? That's ridiculous. Is it? Grant stepped closer. Because that's exactly the kind of thing someone would do if they wanted to get rid of a person they saw as competition. Claudette's mask finally cracked. Her face twisted with something ugly. Rage, fear, desperation. You're choosing her over me. Again. This isn't about choosing anyone, this is about the truth. The truth? Claudette laughed, a bitter, broken sound. The truth is you've been in love with her since your wife died. The truth is you never got over Elise, and Nia's the closest thing you have left to her. The truth is I've been trying to build a life with you, and you've been holding on to ghosts. Grant stood frozen. So yes, Claudette hissed. I tied her up. I disconnected the camera. I was going to make that baby sick and blame her for it, because I'm tired of being second place to the help. The room went dead silent. Grant couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he'd just heard. Beatrice stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And somewhere outside, Nia collapsed against the wall of the guest house, finally allowing herself to hope. If you believe truth always finds its voice, subscribe now. Only those who side with lies ignore stories like this. Grant moved before he could think. He grabbed the spoiled bottle from the counter and stormed past Claudette, his footsteps echoing through the mansion like thunder. Staff scattered as he passed, maids, gardeners, the security guard who'd just arrived for his shift. They all stopped and stared because they'd never seen Grant Ashford like this. Not angry, not cold, shattered. He pushed through the front door and crossed the lawn in long strides, rain-soaked grass squelching beneath his shoes. The guest house door was still unlocked. He shoved it open. Nia was standing now, her back against the wall, her eyes red but dry. She'd heard everything. The walls weren't thick enough to hide Claudette's confession. The windows carried sound across the property. Nia had stood outside that nursery and listened to the woman who'd destroyed her finally destroy herself. Grant stopped in the doorway, the bottle still in his hand. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Simple. Inadequate. Nia didn't respond. "I'm so sorry," Grant said again, his voice breaking. "I should have believed you. I should have listened. You should have trusted the woman your wife called family." Nia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "You should have remembered that I held Elise's hand when she died, that I've loved your son since the day he was born, that I've never given you a single reason to doubt me." "I know." "Do you?" Nia's eyes blazed. "Because you threw me out, Grant. You looked at me like I was a criminal. You believed her over me without a second thought. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." Nia stepped forward. "And you know what the worst part is? I'm not even surprised, because this is what happens to people like me. We're guilty until proven innocent. We're suspects before we're human, and no amount of loyalty or kindness or love changes that." Grant's chest felt like it was caving in. Behind him, footsteps approached. He turned to see Claudette standing at the entrance to the guest house, flanked by Beatrice and 2 other staff members. Her perfect facade was gone. Her eyes were wild, her hands clenched into fists. "You want the truth?" Claudette's voice was shrill. "Fine. I'll give you the truth. I did it. I tied her up. I was going to poison that baby and blame her, because she was in my way, because you look at her like she matters and you look at me like I'm replaceable." The staff members gasped. Beatrice started crying openly. "I've spent 2 years trying to make you love me," Claudette continued, her voice rising with each word. "I've played the perfect girlfriend. I've smiled through your grief. I've pretended to care about your dead wife's memory. And for what? So you could keep some random maid around like she's part of the family?" "She is part of the family," Grant said quietly. Claudette laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No, she's not. She's the help. That's all she'll ever be." Nia flinched, but she didn't look away. Grant moved toward Claudette slowly, deliberately. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of my house, pack your things. I want you gone within the hour." Claudette's face went white. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." Grant's voice was ice. "You tried to hurt my son. You framed an innocent woman. You manipulated my staff. You're lucky I'm not calling the police." "I'm lucky?" Claudette's voice pitched higher. "I'm the one who stayed when everyone else left. I'm the one who put up with your misery and your guilt and your obsession with the past, and this is how you repay me? You tried to poison my child." Grant's voice cracked on the last word. "There's no coming back from that." For a moment, Claudette just stared at him. Then something shifted in her expression. Something cold and final. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "When you're alone again. When you realize what you've lost. You'll regret choosing her over me." "I already regret choosing you at all." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Claudette turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the path. The staff members scattered, following at a distance, whispering frantically to each other. Beatrice stayed behind. She approached Nia slowly, tears still streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Beatrice whispered. "I knew something was wrong. I saw the timestamps, but I was too scared to say anything." Nia reached out and squeezed her hand. "You said something when it mattered. That's enough." Beatrice nodded and left, leaving Grant and Nia alone in the suffocating silence. Grant sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I don't know how to fix this." Nia sat down across from him, keeping distance between them. "You can't." "Then what do I do?" You do better. Nia's voice was quiet but firm. You remember this moment. You remember what it felt like to be wrong, and you make sure it never happens again. Grant looked up at her, his eyes red. Will you stay? Nia was quiet for a long time. Ezra needs me, she finally said. So I'll stay for him. But you and I? We're going to need time. I understand. Do you? Nia leaned forward. Because trust isn't something you can just apologize for and move on. Trust is built over years and destroyed in seconds. And right now, I don't trust you, Grant. I don't trust that you'll see me as more than the help. I don't trust that the next time someone accuses me, you won't believe them first. The words cut deeper than any blade. Then I'll earn it back, Grant said, however long it takes. Nia stood. We'll see. She walked out of the guest house and across the lawn, back toward the mansion where baby Ezra was probably crying for her. Grant watched her go, his heart heavy with the weight of his mistakes, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again. Nia found Ezra exactly where she'd left him, in the nursery, fussing in his crib, his little face red from crying. The moment he saw her, he reached out with both hands, making that desperate sound babies make when they need the one person who makes them feel safe. Nia's composure finally broke. She scooped him up and held him close, burying her face in his soft hair, letting the tears she'd been holding back for hours finally fall. Ezra quieted immediately, his tiny hand gripping her shirt like he'd never let go. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere. She sank into the rocking chair, the same one where she'd spent countless nights singing him to sleep, where she'd rocked him through fevers and nightmares and the terrible grief of growing up without his mother. For a while, she just sat there, rocking, breathing, letting herself feel safe for the first time in 24 hours. Then she heard footsteps. Grant stood in the doorway, keeping his distance, respecting the space she'd asked for. Can I come in? Nia nodded. He entered slowly and sat on the floor near the window, far enough away that she didn't feel crowded. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the creak of the rocking chair and Ezra's soft breathing as he drifted toward sleep. There's something I need to tell you, Nia finally said. Grant looked up. The night Elise died, Nia's voice wavered. She told me to watch out for Claudette. She said something wasn't right, that Claudette was too interested in you, too eager to step into her place. Grant's jaw tightened. I didn't take it seriously at first, Nia continued. I thought it was just grief talking, fear of being replaced. But then Claudette moved in, and I started noticing things. What things? Small stuff at first. She'd move Elise's pictures when you weren't looking, change routines I'd established with Ezra, contradict my instructions in front of the other staff to make me look incompetent. Nia's hand absently stroked Ezra's back. But 3 weeks ago, something bigger happened. She took a breath. I saw her in the kitchen late one night. I'd come down to warm a bottle for Ezra. She didn't see me at first. She was standing by the counter with a bottle of formula and a small vial. Grant went very still. I watched her pour something into the bottle, just a little. Then she put it back in the fridge and left. Nia's voice cracked. I checked the bottle afterward. It smelled wrong. Sour. Like it had been sitting out for days even though the label said it was fresh. Why didn't you tell me? Because I had no proof. Nia's voice rose, waking Ezra slightly. She lowered it again, rocking him back to sleep. Because if I accused your girlfriend of trying to poison your son with no evidence, who would you have believed? The maid or the woman sharing your bed? Grant closed his eyes, the truth of her words like a knife in his chest. So I threw the bottle away, Nia continued, and I started checking every single bottle before I fed him. Every meal, every snack. I watched everything Claudette did around Ezra like a hawk. But I stayed silent because I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of being called crazy, afraid of being exactly what I became last night, powerless and accused. Tears streamed down her face now. And the worst part? Even after everything, even after she confessed, part of me still feels guilty. Like maybe I should have fought harder, screamed louder, refused to be silent. She looked at Grant, her eyes red and swollen. Because that's what they do to us. They make us doubt ourselves. They make us think we deserved it. Grant stood and moved closer, sinking to his knees beside the rocking chair. He didn't touch her, didn't try to comfort her. He just knelt there, his own tears falling freely. "You saved his life," Grant whispered. "You've been saving his life for weeks and I was too blind to see it. I just did what anyone would have done." "No." Grant shook his head. "Most people would have walked away. Most people would have chosen their own safety over a child that wasn't theirs. But you stayed. You protected him even when it meant sacrificing yourself." Nia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He's not mine. He's Elise's. And Elise asked me to protect him. So that's what I did." Grant looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in Nia's arms, the same arms that had held him every day of his short life, the same arms that had refused to let him come to harm even when it cost her everything. "I will never forgive myself for what I did to you," Grant said quietly. "But I promise you, on Elise's memory, on everything I have, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you're seen, heard, valued, not as the help, as family." Nia met his eyes. "Words are easy, Grant. Let's see if your actions match." "They will." She nodded slowly, then stood, still cradling Ezra. "I need to put him down, and then I need to sleep for about a week. Take as long as you need. Your job isn't going anywhere." Nia paused at the door. "It was never about the job." "I know." She walked out, leaving Grant alone in the nursery where everything had started and ended. He sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the spot where Nia had been tied up, where he'd made the worst mistake of his life. And he made a silent vow. Never again. Comment. Truth wins if you believe justice might be slow, but it always arrives. 3 days passed before things started to feel real. Claudette was gone, escorted off the property by 2 security guards and a lawyer who made it very clear she wouldn't be coming back. No police were called. Grant wanted to avoid the scandal, the media circus, the questions that would follow. But the threat was there, hanging over Claudette like a storm cloud. "Try anything, and I'll press charges." She left without a fight, without even looking back. The mansion felt different after she was gone, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the walls themselves. But Nia still hadn't moved back into her room. She stayed in the guest house caring for Ezra during the day, retreating to solitude at night. Grant gave her space, more space than he wanted to give, because he knew she needed time to heal, time to trust again. But on the 3rd night, something broke. Grant was in his study when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. Crying. Not Ezra. Nia. He found her in the nursery, sitting on the floor in the dark, her knees pulled to her chest, her whole body shaking with sobs she was trying to muffle. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed him standing in the doorway, watching her fall apart in the silence. "Nia." She looked up, startled, and immediately tried to wipe her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I was just..." "Don't apologize." Grant stepped into the room slowly. "Please, you have nothing to apologize for." "I thought I was fine," she whispered. "I thought I could just move on, but every time I walk into this room I feel it. The rope, the fear, the way you looked at me like I was..." Her voice broke completely. Grant crossed the room and knelt in front of her, keeping enough distance that she didn't feel trapped. "I should have untied you the moment I walked in," he said quietly. "I should have cut those ropes myself and carried you somewhere safe and made sure you knew you were never alone. But I didn't. I left you there. And I will regret that for the rest of my life." Nia shook her head. You didn't know. I should have. Grant's voice was firm. I should have known you better, trusted you more, loved you the way Elise did. The word hung in the air between them. Loved, not past tense. Present. Nia's breath hitched. Grant reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently took her hands in his, the same hands that still bore faint scars from the rope. Let me do this, he said softly. Let me undo what I failed to undo that night. It was symbolic. The ropes were long gone. But the weight of them, the invisible bindings of shame and guilt and fear, still wrapped around Nia like chains. Grant lifted her hands and pressed his forehead to them. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Nia's tears fell freely now, not silent anymore, but loud and raw and human. I forgive you, she whispered. I don't know if I should, but I do. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken people holding each other in the dark. Then from the crib across the room, Ezra stirred. He let out a soft cry, not distressed, just awake and wanting comfort. Nia pulled away gently and stood, moving to the crib on instinct. But when she reached for him, Ezra's arms stretched past her, toward Grant. Both of them froze. Ezra had never done that before. He'd always reached for Nia first, always. But now, he looked between them, his father and the woman who'd raised him, and seemed to understand, in that mysterious way babies sometimes do, that something had changed, that they were both safe now. Grant lifted his son carefully, and Ezra immediately grabbed for Nia too, his tiny hands opening and closing until she moved closer. She placed her hand on Ezra's back and Grant covered it with his own. The three of them stood there in the soft glow of the nightlight, not quite a family, but not quite strangers anymore either. Something in between, something healing. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall. Soft, steady, cleansing. And for the first time in 3 days, Nia felt like she could breathe. The staff didn't know what to do with the silence. For 2 years, Claudette had been a constant presence. Loud, commanding, always inserting herself into conversations and decisions that weren't hers to make. Now that she was gone, the mansion felt strangely empty, peaceful but uncomfortable, like the quiet after a storm when you're not sure if it's really over. Beatrice was the first to break. She found Nia in the kitchen 3 days after Claudette left, preparing Ezra's breakfast with the same careful attention she always had. Beatrice stood in the doorway for a moment, wringing her hands, before finally stepping inside. Nia. Nia looked up from the blender where she was mixing fruit and oatmeal. I need to say something. Beatrice's voice trembled. I knew. Not everything, but I knew something was wrong. I saw the timestamps. I saw how Claudette looked at you when Mr. Grant wasn't around, and I said nothing. Nia set down the blender. Beatrice, no, please let me finish. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. I was scared. Scared of losing my job. Scared of what she might do if I spoke up. But that's no excuse. I should have stood with you. I should have told Mr. Grant what I saw. Nia walked over and took Beatrice's hands. You told him when it mattered most. That's what counts. But you suffered because I stayed quiet. We all suffer when we're too afraid to speak. Nia's voice was gentle but firm. But we're not afraid anymore, are we? Beatrice shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No. Never again. They hugged. Two women who'd been taught to stay invisible finally allowing themselves to be seen. Over the next few days, other staff members came forward. The gardener admitted he'd seen Claudette tampering with the security cameras weeks before the incident, but assumed she was just being nosy. The housekeeper confessed that Claudette had asked her to spy on Nia's movements and report back anything suspicious. Each confession added another piece to the puzzle Grant had been too blind to see. Claudette hadn't just framed Nia on a whim. She'd been building toward it for months, planting seeds of doubt, creating a narrative, ensuring that when the moment came, everyone would believe her over the black woman who worked for them. The realization made Grant physically ill. He called a meeting with the entire staff on the 5th day. Everyone gathered in the main sitting room: maids, gardeners, drivers, security. Some looked nervous. Others looked relieved. Grant stood at the front of the room, Nia beside him. Not behind him. Beside him. "I owe all of you an apology," Grant began. His voice was steady, but heavy. "I allowed someone into this home who created an environment of fear and manipulation. I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it. And because of my blindness, someone I care about, someone this family depends on, was hurt." He gestured to Nia. "Nia isn't just an employee. She's family. She was family to my wife. She's family to my son. And from now on, she'll be treated as such by everyone in this house. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now with a good reference and severance pay." No one moved. "Good." Grant's jaw tightened. "I also want to make something clear. If anyone on this staff ever witnesses abuse, discrimination, or injustice toward Nia or anyone else, I expect you to come to me immediately. No more silence, no more fear. This house should be safe for everyone who lives and works here." Beatrice raised her hand tentatively. "And if we're afraid of retaliation? Then you come to me anyway." Grant's voice softened. "I can't promise I'll always get it right, but I promise I'll listen, and I promise I'll act." The room was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. One by one, staff members approached Nia. Some apologized. Some thanked her. Some just held her hand and said nothing at all. When the room finally cleared, only Grant and Nia remained. "That was hard for you," Nia said quietly. "It should have been harder." Grant looked at her. "I got off easy. You're the one who lived through it." "We both lived through it." Nia sat down on the couch, exhaustion written across her face. "Now we have to figure out how to move forward." "Do you want revenge?" Grant asked. "We could press charges, make sure she never works again, ruin her the way she tried to ruin you." Nia was quiet for a long time. "No," she finally said. "I don't want revenge. I want peace. I want to raise Ezra without looking over my shoulder. I want to trust again." She looked up at Grant. "Revenge won't give me that." Grant sat beside her, not too close, still respecting boundaries. "Elise would be proud of you," he said softly. Nia's eyes filled with tears. "I hope so." They sat in silence as rain began to fall outside again. And somewhere in the nursery above them, Ezra slept peacefully, unaware that the people who loved him were slowly learning how to heal. Grant couldn't stop thinking about the rope. It sat in his study now, coiled neatly in a corner where no one else would see it. He'd taken it from the evidence bag security had prepared, insisting he needed to keep it. They'd thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But every time he looked at it, he remembered. The way Nia's wrists had bled, the terror in her eyes, the silence she'd chosen because she believed no one would listen. The moment he'd looked at her and decided she was guilty before she even had a chance to speak. Some nights, he couldn't sleep. He'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that scene over and over, changing small details in his mind like maybe if he imagined it differently enough times it would rewrite history. In his imagination, he cut the ropes immediately. He pulled Nia into his arms and apologized. He called the police on Claudette right then and there. He never doubted, never hesitated, never failed. But reality wasn't so kind. Reality was messy and permanent and full of mistakes you couldn't take back. On the 7th night, he found himself in the nursery again. It was becoming a habit, this restless wandering through the house at 3 a.m., ending up in the room where everything had fallen apart. He stood in the spot where Nia had knelt, where she'd been bound and helpless and terrified, where his son had slept peacefully against her chest, completely unaware that the woman holding him was being destroyed. Grant sank to the floor and put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." His phone buzzed. A text from his therapist, the one he'd started seeing 3 days ago when he realized he couldn't process this alone. Guilt is natural, but don't let it paralyze you. Transform it into action. Grant read the message twice, then stood. He walked to his study and pulled out the rope. He held it in his hands, rough, red-stained from Naya's wrists, heavier than it should be. Then he walked outside into the rain. The property had a fire pit near the garden, the one Elise used to gather around with friends during summer nights. Grant hadn't lit it since she died. Tonight he did. He watched the flames grow, then dropped the rope into the fire. It caught immediately, twisted and blackened, and turned to ash within minutes. Grant stood in the rain and watched it burn, feeling something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness, he didn't deserve that yet. Not peace, that was still far away. But maybe the beginning of both. When the last piece of rope dissolved into smoke, Grant turned and walked back toward the house. He didn't know if Nia was watching from the guest house window. Didn't know if she understood what he'd just done. But he hoped she did. Because burning that rope wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about refusing to let it define them forever. It was about choosing to move forward, even when the past weighed 1,000 pounds. Grant knocked on the guest house door at 8 a.m., with a tray in his hands. Tea. Not coffee. Nia preferred tea in the mornings, chamomile with honey, no milk. He'd asked Beatrice to show him how she prepared it, and he'd done it himself this time, every step. Nia opened the door, surprise flickering across her face when she saw him. "Mr. Grant." "Just Grant," he interrupted gently. "Please." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. The guest house was sparse. She hadn't brought much from her room in the main house. A few clothes, some books, a framed photo of her and Elise laughing together in the garden. Grant set the tray on the small table and gestured for her to sit. She did, slowly, watching him with guarded eyes. He poured the tea carefully, then slid the cup toward her. "I didn't come here to ask you to move back," he said quietly, "or to rush your healing. I came to apologize, really apologize, not just with words." Nia wrapped her hands around the cup, but didn't drink. Grant took a breath. "I've set up an account in your name, $50,000. It's not payment for what you went through. Nothing could be. But it's a start. It's yours to use however you want. Leave if you need to. Stay if you choose to. But either way, you'll have security." Nia's eyes widened. "Grant, I can't." "You can." His voice was firm but kind. "And there's more. I've had my lawyer draft a contract. You're no longer an employee of this household. You're Ezra's legal godmother, with full rights and protections. If anything happens to me, you're his guardian." Tears filled Nia's eyes. Elise wanted that. "I know, and I should have made it official a long time ago." Grant leaned forward. "I also want to make a public statement. Clear your name formally. Let everyone know what really happened." "No." Nia's response was immediate. "I don't want that attention. I don't want to be a headline." "Then what do you want?" Nia set down her tea and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since that horrible night. "I want you to be better," she said simply, "not just to me, to everyone. I want you to remember what it felt like to be wrong, to be powerless, to realize that the person you trusted was the villain and the person you dismissed was the hero." Her voice cracked. "I want you to carry that lesson forever." Grant's throat tightened. "I will." "And I want you to teach Ezra," Nia continued. "Teach him to listen before he judges, to see people for who they are, not what they look like or where they come from. Teach him that kindness isn't weakness and silence isn't consent." "I promise." Nia wiped her eyes. "Then that's enough." They sat in silence as rain began to tap against the windows. Soft, rhythmic, soothing. "Will you come back to the house?" Grant asked finally. "Not as an employee, as family." Nia was quiet for a long time. "Not yet," she said. "But maybe soon." Grant nodded. "Whenever you're ready." He stood to leave, but Nia's voice stopped him. "Grant?" He turned. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finally seeing me." His vision blurred with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Thank you for not giving up on us." He walked back to the main house through the rain, feeling lighter than he had in days. Behind him, Nia picked up her tea and took the first sip. It was perfect. Have you ever had to forgive someone who failed you? Comment below, because what happens next will show you the true cost of redemption. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a promise. For the first time in months, the mansion didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. Laughter floated through the halls, balloons lined the staircase. The smell of vanilla cake and fresh flowers filled the air. Ezra's first birthday had arrived. Grant stood by the window, watching the staff bustle about with decorations. For days, he'd debated whether to even host a celebration. After everything that had happened, joy felt almost foreign, like a language he was just beginning to relearn. But Nia had said something that stuck with him. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without breaking. So he decided to remember, with love. By noon, the garden was glowing. Streamers in soft blues and golds fluttered in the breeze. A small crowd gathered, staff, friends, neighbors who'd supported them through whispers and rumors. Grant noticed the way everyone looked at Nia now, not with suspicion, not with pity, but with respect. She stood near the cake table, wearing a simple white dress, her hair in soft curls, holding Ezra on her hip. The baby clapped his hands, fascinated by the candles, the crowd, the attention. And for the first time, Nia didn't shrink from it. She smiled. When Grant took the microphone, the chatter faded. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but weighted with meaning. "I wasn't sure I had the right to stand here today," he began. "A few months ago, I made choices that nearly destroyed the two people I love most. But life has a way of giving second chances to those willing to learn, and I've learned more from Nia than I have from anyone." The audience went still. Nia blinked, holding Ezra a little tighter. Grant continued. "This woman has taught me what loyalty looks like when it costs you everything, what love means when it's not returned in kind, what truth sounds like when no one wants to hear it." His voice caught, just for a second. "She protected my son when I didn't. She protected this family when I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. And today, I want to honor her. Not as an employee, not as a caretaker, but as the heart of this home." The crowd applauded softly. A few tears shimmered in the sunlight. Grant gestured to a small velvet box on the table. "Nia, this is for you." She hesitated, then stepped forward as he opened the box. Inside lay a delicate gold bracelet, engraved with 3 words, "You were right." A ripple of emotion passed through the gathering. Nia stared at it, speechless. "It's not about the words," Grant said gently. "It's about remembering that truth doesn't need permission, that doing the right thing shouldn't cost someone their dignity." Nia's eyes filled. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said simply, "because you deserve to hear it out loud." She slid the bracelet onto her wrist, her fingers trembling. It caught the sunlight and sparkled, a quiet symbol of survival, of recognition, of justice long delayed, but finally delivered. Then Ezra babbled, reaching out for both of them. Nia laughed through her tears, and Grant stepped closer. Together they helped Ezra blow out the single candle on his cake. The crowd clapped, cameras clicked, and for a brief, perfect moment, on his cake. The crowd clapped, cameras clicked, and for a brief, perfect moment it didn't matter what had happened before. The air was filled with something pure, something unbroken. As everyone sang, Grant looked at Nia and realized this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about rebuilding. About learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight, but to trust again. The song ended. Ezra smeared frosting on his face, and Nia laughed, a sound Grant hadn't heard in so long it almost made him cry. He thought about all the pain, the silence, the fear, and how far they'd come. Maybe redemption wasn't a finish line. Maybe it was a birthday candle you had to relight every year. And as the wind carried the sound of laughter across the garden, one truth echoed louder than the rest. The ones who stand for what's right may bend, but they never break. If you believe no one deserves humiliation for doing right, subscribe now. Because silence only protects the cruel. Nia sat alone in the guest house that evening, the party long over. The garden was quiet now, scattered with deflated balloons and crumbs of cake. Ezra fast asleep in his crib. The world felt soft, like it had been washed clean. She held the bracelet in her hands, turning it slowly, catching the faint gleam of the overhead light. She had worn it all day, but now, finally, she allowed herself a moment to look closely. Engraved on the inside were words she hadn't read before. Blood may give life, but love gives belonging. The message struck her like a quiet hammer. She traced the letters with her finger, feeling the depth of each word. Belonging. Something she hadn't thought she would ever feel again. Not here, not anywhere. Not after Claudette's lies, the whispers, the doubt, the fear. Her eyes stung, and for the first time in weeks, the tears came freely. Warm and unrestrained, they rolled down her cheeks, and she let them fall without shame. For once, no one was judging. No one was questioning. No one had ever doubted her in that small, perfect moment. She realized she had carried so much weight, the weight of silence, the weight of other people's expectations, the weight of surviving a world that often assumed the worst about her. And yet, in that single line of engraved gold, she felt something shift. Love, recognition, acceptance. A truth that had been withheld for too long, finally spoken in the quietest way possible. Nia thought of Grant, of Ezra, of all the small, ordinary acts that had built trust again. The way Grant had knelt beside her in the nursery. The way he had fought for her, even when it was easier to stay blind. The way he had chosen her as family, without hesitation, without condition. The bracelet wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol. A reminder that survival alone wasn't enough, that being seen and valued was a right, not a reward. And for the first time, Nia felt it, the feeling of belonging. Her thoughts drifted to Claudette. The bitterness, the lies, the manipulations, still there, still sharp, but no longer powerful. Love had spoken louder than cruelty. Recognition had drowned out suspicion. Justice, she realized, wasn't just punishment. Sometimes it was acknowledgement. Sometimes it was letting someone live in their truth without fear. Nia clasped the bracelet tightly around her wrist. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "I belong." For the first time, she truly did. And it wasn't because anyone had given it to her lightly. It was because she had endured, because she had protected, because she had loved fiercely despite everything. She looked at her sleeping son and smiled through her tears. He didn't just have life, he had belonging. And now, so did she. The bracelet caught the faint glimmer of the moonlight through the window, and Nia felt the quiet power of it. A reminder that recognition matters, that truth matters. That love, in the end, is the only thing strong enough to overcome fear. And in that moment, she finally allowed herself to believe it. The world could be cruel, but it could also see her. It could honor her. It could let her live fully in the light she had earned. The morning sun spilled into the mansion like gold, warm and bright, chasing away the shadows that had lingered for far too long. The house felt different now, lighter, softer, as if it had been holding its breath for 2 years and was finally allowed to exhale. Grant stood in the study, waiting. Nia arrived quietly, holding Ezra in her arms, his tiny fingers curling around hers. She wore the bracelet still, its message glinting in the sunlight. Blood may give life, but love gives belonging. It was a quiet armor, but it made her feel stronger than ever. "Sit," Grant said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "I want to make this official. For you, for Ezra, for everyone." Nia lowered herself into the chair, heart steady, but cautious. She had been here before, seen promises made, only to have them broken. But something in Grant's eyes told her this time was different. "I've spoken with my lawyer," he began, voice measured but warm. "You're no longer just a caretaker. You're Ezra's legal guardian, full rights, full responsibility. I'm signing it today. No conditions, no fine print, your family." The words sank in slowly. Nia's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding her. Family. Not servant. Not secondary. Not a footnote in someone else's life. Ezra cooed and stretched his tiny hands toward her, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Nia hugged him close, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the freedom that came with it. She had survived Claudette's lies. She had saved this child, and now the world officially recognized her place. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for trusting me, for seeing me, for giving me this." Grant nodded, leaning back in his chair. "You earned it, every day. I just finally admitted it. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about dignity restored, about the truth finally catching up to reality. Nia's courage, her love, her unwavering care, it all mattered now, and no one could take that from her." Over the next hours, they walked through Ezra's nursery together. Nia taught him his first lessons, not numbers or letters, but the lessons that mattered most: kindness, patience, respect. She spoke to him of a world where love mattered more than class, more than color, more than status, where people were seen, heard, and valued for who they were. Grant watched quietly from the doorway, realizing that every decision he'd made before, wrong though it had been, had led him here, to this morning, to this fragile, luminous peace. By midday, the sunlight was golden and strong, pouring into every corner of the house. Nia placed Ezra on the playmat, watching him crawl toward a bright, handmade toy she'd given him. She smiled, a soft, private smile, the kind that belonged to someone finally standing in their own light. Grant stepped closer, voice low. "This feels like the start of something real." Nia nodded, eyes still on Ezra. "It is. And this time, we build it right." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain from the night before. The mansion, the guest house, the nursery, they all held echoes of fear, of mistakes, of doubt. But now, they also held the promise of belonging, of love recognized and returned. And for the first time in a long while, Nia allowed herself to hope, not for perfection, not for a story without struggle, but for a life where justice, recognition, and love were stronger than cruelty and silence. Because finally they were free to begin again. If you believe no one deserves humiliation for doing right, subscribe now. Because silence only protects the cruel. The day started like any other. Soft sunlight spilling across the mansion grounds, birds calling from the trees. Nia was in the nursery, reading Ezra a story, his small hand gripping hers as he traced the pictures. Grant lingered nearby, quietly tidying paperwork, the hum of the house settling into its new rhythm. Then the doorbell rang. A strange, sharp tension filled the air. Guests weren't common this early in the morning, and certainly not unannounced. Nia exchanged a look with Grant, one of those glances that spoke volumes about the quiet understanding they had built together. Grant moved toward the door cautiously, but Nia rose behind him, her calm presence steadying his nerves. He opened it to find Claudette standing there, quiet, vulnerable, her usual arrogance stripped away. I came to apologize, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I've been wrong. I hurt people. I hurt you. And I'm sorry. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. Months of scheming, fear, and shame now stood exposed in a single breath. Nia's heart beat steadily, her gaze unflinching. You want forgiveness? She said slowly. Do you understand what that means? Claudette nodded, tears brimming. I do. I don't deserve it. I don't. But I came anyway. Nia stepped forward, her hand extended, not in accusation, not in anger, but in recognition of the choice she was making. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was power. It was the knowledge that letting go of hatred healed the heart more than punishing the guilty ever could. I forgive you, Nia said, her voice steady, yet gentle. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because I refuse to let your cruelty shape me any longer. Claudette blinked, overwhelmed. She had expected rage, judgment, maybe tears of humiliation. Instead, she faced grace, something she had never known, and now could not manipulate. Grant watched from behind Nia, silent, humbled. He had learned a lesson over the past months that no punishment could teach as effectively. True strength was not about control, not about retribution. It was about moral courage, humility, and the ability to rise above cruelty. Claudette spoke again, her voice shaking. Thank you. I don't know if I can ever repay you. Nia shook her head. Repayment isn't required. Change is. Let that be enough. Claudette turned, leaving quietly, the mansion doors closing softly behind her. The tension lifted. Silence filled the space, no longer heavy, but gentle, almost sacred. Nia looked at Grant. He nodded, understanding without words. Forgiveness was the truest form of victory. It had not only freed Claudette, it had freed them. Ezra giggled, breaking the solemnity, tugging at Nia's hand. She smiled, holding him close. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled them. If you believe strength is measured by forgiveness, subscribe now, because holding on to hate only prolongs the pain. The mansion was quiet that morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off the polished floors. Ezra crawled across the rug, giggling, chasing a small wooden train. Nia watched him, her hands folded in her lap, a soft smile touching her lips. Grant stood by the window, coffee in hand, staring at the garden as though seeing it for the first time. It had been months since the storm of betrayal, fear, and grief. Months since Claudette's plot had been revealed. Months since Nia had been tied, scared, and almost silenced forever. And yet, the lessons lingered stronger than the pain ever had. Grant's reflection hit him hardest that morning. He realized wealth had never been the source of real power. Money could buy comfort, security, even influence. But it could not buy understanding, loyalty, or love. Those were earned. And he had almost thrown them away, believing the wrong person over the woman who had spent every day caring for his son as if he were her own. He looked at Nia, at the way she moved effortlessly between his son's laughter and the quiet dignity she carried, and he understood. Wealth was empty without empathy. Power was meaningless without justice. And the smallest acts of courage, the ones done quietly, unseen, could save lives, hearts, and even souls. Nia, in turn, had learned her own lesson. Silence could be noble, patience could protect, courage could hide behind a smile. But truth had to speak eventually. She had stayed quiet because she feared disbelief, feared humiliation, feared losing her place in a world that had never fully seen her. Yet when she finally revealed what she had witnessed, when she let her voice cut through the fear, it had changed everything. She had been right, steadfast, and necessary. She had been the shield for Ezra, and in the end, the truth had carried its own justice. They had both learned about the fragility and strength of trust, about the cost of judgment and the quiet power of listening before assuming guilt. about the courage it takes to rise after being doubted, disbelieved, and devalued. Grant finally turned from the window and joined Nia on the floor, playing with Ezra. He lifted a train car into the child's hands, watching the wonder light up his son's face. "You've taught me more than I could ever teach you," he said quietly. Nia shook her head. "No, you taught yourself. I just gave you a chance to see it." There was a silence, deep and reflective, that filled the space between them. The mansion no longer felt like a place of power and prestige. It felt like a home, a place where mistakes could be confronted and lessons could take root. In that quiet, Grant and Nia realized the world outside the walls would never fully understand the significance of the battles they had faced. The quiet bravery, the moral choices, the strength to forgive. But inside these walls, their family had learned the most important truths of all: that love can protect, that courage can endure, and that empathy is worth more than a fortune. They both understood that the measure of a life was not in status, wealth, or recognition. It was in integrity, in the ability to do what is right even when the world doubts you, and in the capacity to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Ezra babbled happily, tugging Nia's hair playfully, and Grant laughed, a pure, unguarded laugh. The lessons were heavy, yes, but the weight of them had built something unshakable: respect, gratitude, and an unbreakable bond that no outside force could ever destroy. And as they sat together, the sun warming the room, the moral became clear not just for them, but for anyone who would listen. Courage and truth do not always roar. They often whisper, wait, and act quietly, shaping destinies without expectation. If this story touched your heart, share it, and let the world remember. Never look down on those who serve you. They might just be angels in disguise. The morning sunlight spilled into the nursery, warm and golden, brushing over the soft curves of Ezra's crib. The day smelled faintly of chamomile and rain from the garden outside, a quiet calm that felt almost sacred. Nia sat on the floor, legs crossed, watching her son stack colorful blocks, his tiny tongue poking out in concentration. She had grown used to mornings like this, slow, gentle, unhurried. No longer rushing, no longer anxious. Each moment was a gift, a chance to nurture a child whose life she had fought to protect, whose heart she had learned to love as fiercely as any mother could. Grant appeared in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. He watched them quietly, a cup of coffee in his hand. There was something in the way he observed them now that Nia hadn't seen before, not ownership, not control, but gratitude, humility, and awe. Ezra looked up, grinning at Grant, then back at Nia. He wobbled on unsteady legs and tottered toward her. She caught him just as he stumbled, laughter spilling out of him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Mama," Ezra said suddenly, clear and ringing, his small hands clutching at her arms. Nia froze. Her heart skipped. She blinked rapidly, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Mama?" she repeated softly, as if saying it aloud could make it real. "Yes," Ezra insisted, his grin widening, the word carrying more weight than any title she had ever held. It was not just a sound. It was acknowledgement, trust, and belonging all at once. Tears pricked at Nia's eyes, hot and unexpected. She pulled Ezra close, hugging him tighter than she had ever hugged anyone, letting her own fears, doubts, and loneliness melt away in that embrace. The world outside, the judgment, the betrayal, the uncertainty, faded until it was nothing more than a whisper she could barely hear. Grant stepped forward slowly, hands empty, heart open. "He's right," he said softly, almost to himself. "Your family. Always have been. Always will be." Nia looked up at him, her own tears streaking her cheeks. She searched his eyes, seeing the remorse, the acknowledgement, and the promise that he would never again take her presence for granted. I don't need a title, she said, voice trembling, but thank you for seeing me. Grant nodded, voice low and steady. You've earned everything, and more. I promise you, Naya, you will never be invisible here again. The three of them sat together on the nursery floor. Ezra crawled between them, reaching for both of their hands. They took him together, creating a circle of warmth, safety, and trust. The laughter, the quiet conversations, the gentle scolding over spilled blocks, all of it felt like a home, not just a house. Nia felt a fullness she had never known. The betrayal, the fear, the sleepless nights, they had not broken her. They had shaped her into someone stronger, someone who could forgive without forgetting, love without hesitation, and trust without arrogance. Grant, watching them, understood too. He had chased status, wealth, and control, but none of it had given him what this moment offered: genuine connection, shared responsibility, and the humility to honor the hands that had held him and his son when no one else would. Outside, the garden swayed gently in a soft breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a piano note from the mansion floated up, delicate and serene, carrying with it the unspoken truths of love, courage, and redemption. Nia cradled Ezra in her arms, whispering softly to him as he drifted into a quiet nap. You are safe, you are loved, and you are home. Grant leaned close, his forehead touching hers for a brief, reverent moment. Thank you, he said simply. Forgive quickly, judge slowly, and honor the hands that hold you when no one else will. Outside the window, sunlight bathed the garden in gold. Inside, laughter and warmth filled the nursery. For the first time in years, there was peace. Real, unshakable, and shared. The story ends not with a thunderclap or a grand gesture, but with a quiet truth that echoes far beyond the walls of a mansion. Love is not given because it is easy, nor earned because it is expected. It is a choice, a courage, and a voice that must be heard. And in that voice, Naya, Grant, and Ezra found not just family, but forever.